All right, turn in your book to the section that says Northern Life. It's right after Vicksburg. And we're going to begin with our quick write. It says, how do rivals view one another? What type of feelings does this generate and why? So rivals are enemies. So how do enemies view each other? What kind of feelings do enemies have toward one another and why? Go ahead and write 2 to 3 sentences. Press pause and then play when you're ready. Today we're going to look at finding the main idea of our text, Northern Life. So we need to come up with a how or why question about Northern Life. So why is Northern Life important to the author? How is Northern Life different from Southern Life? Those are 2 good questions. You can write one of those down right here, and then go back up to preview the vocabulary. Our first word is home front, the civilian population and activities of a nation whose armed forces are engaged in war. So and we know during the Civil War the men were off fighting. They didn't let women fight in the war. And so we see this poster that says we can do it, and it's symbolizes, the women had to go to work in the factories because the men were fighting in the Civil War. And so this poster is encouraging women, like, you can do it, we can hold up the home front and keep everything going while the men are at war. Next we have shortage, a deficiency in quality or in quantity. That means you have less of something. And so we're looking at this picture. It says do less so they'll have enough. So during the Civil War and a lot of wars in the United States, there were shortages in things like coffee, rubber, sugar, bunch of different things so that the soldiers could have materials. And then last we have frontier. It's a line separating 2 countries. And in our text today, you'll learn about the western frontier. So if you're looking at this map, this red area or pink area shows where people in the United States had not moved yet. So the Civil War was going on the East Coast right here. And you'll learn in your text how immigrants started to move west into this area. They haven't gotten all the way over to the Pacific Ocean on the west coast yet. There's this huge mountain range right here that we had to figure out how to cross first. Alright, so we're going to begin reading our text, and I want you to underline evidence for the main idea. Citizens of New England and the Midwest were stunned when the Southern states left the Union. When the Confederates fired on Fort Sumter, that shock turned to anger. Many volunteered immediately to fight for the Union. But until July 1863, Union armies lost often on the battlefield. And we should remember this date. We've been talking about it pretty recently, about what battle that was. Through that period, the North's real success was on the home front. Industries in northern towns took on extra men, and in some places even employed women. After President Lincoln signed the Homestead Act of 1862, many immigrants headed west to make new homes on free frontier land. While Southerners were suffering food and clothing shortages, their rebellious nation was shrinking in size daily. The Union was growing larger and richer. So it really depends on what question you ask. If you asked, how is Northern life different from Southern life? The last part of this section is where you can find your main idea. If you asked, a why question about Northern life, your answer might be towards the front. But what you really should think about is, what is the author trying to tell us about Northern life? How was Northern life during the Civil War? And so we know that our author tells us that Northern life was really successful. They had a lot of success because people were hiring more men and women, and the United States was expanding west. The South, in comparison, had food and clothing shortages, and they were shrinking because the Union Army was taking over the South with each battle they won. Go ahead and write down your main idea, press pause, and then when you're ready, we're at the baseball section on the next page. It says, organized baseball gathered a foothold during the Civil War years. That means it became more popular. People started paying attention to baseball during the Civil War. Northern towns had the peace, prosperity, and leisure time to establish simple baseball leagues. This is an 1864 photograph of the Brooklyn Atlantics baseball team. The Atlantics had their team photographs mounted on cardboard. The photographs were passed around like modern-day baseball cards. So now we're thinking, what role did baseball play on the Northern home front? And if you go back in your text, it says, Northern towns had the peace, prosperity, and leisure time to establish baseball leagues. So because everything was so great in the North, they even had time to play sports and watch sports because they had free time. They weren't having to work super long hours because they had enough money. So the role that baseball played was, it was a form of entertainment. Our text says leisure time. And then what did baseball symbolize during wartime? Well, if the Northern towns are experiencing peace, prosperity, and leisure time, this baseball kind of symbolizes their success. It symbolizes the fact that they aren't worried about losing the war. They're pretty confident that they're going to win because they are spending time and money playing sports or watching sports. Write down your answers in box 2 and then follow along for wishful cartoon on the first page. We're looking at this picture. It says, President Lincoln was often teased in political cartoons, but sometimes he was praised. This cartoon, published shortly after his 1860 election victory, expressed the public's hope that the new leader could bring the nation back together. And you kind of have to look a little deeper into the picture. So this is President Lincoln, and he has a bucket of Union glue, and it seems like he's trying to repair this wall where there is this division between North and South. And so you need to think about and so that's how we are going to describe the political cartoon. President Lincoln has a bucket of glue, and he's trying to repair this divide or crack in the wall between North and South. Press pause if you need to, and then play when you're ready. And now we're thinking, what's the author trying to communicate? Well, we know North represents the northern states and South represents the southern states, and there's this crack because the South broke away, or they seceded from the North or the Union. And President Lincoln feels like it's his job to repair our nation and make us united and one whole nation again. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for a tool of Union victory here at the bottom. It says, many historians claim Northern industry won the war for the Union. This wool carding machine from the factory in Pennsylvania made wool that could be turned into military uniforms. The South supplied manufacturers with raw materials such as cotton, but it lacked the large amounts of machinery and workers to make products for its own use. So we're thinking, what role did machinery play in the Northern war front? And so we know that according to our text, it says a factory in Pennsylvania, which is the North, right, made wool that could be turned into uniforms. Okay, so this tool, this wool carding machine, clothed the Union Army. And we know that, it gets really cold in the North, and so it's really important that they would have, high quality clothes, especially during the winter. And then it says, press pause if you need to write it down and play when you're ready. The last question, how was lack of machinery a disadvantage for the Southern war front? So if we go back in our text, it said, the South, even though they had cotton, they didn't have the machinery to turn cotton into clothes. So even though they had the materials, they didn't have the machinery that could turn the materials into something useful for war. So because they didn't have machinery, they could not turn their cotton into uniforms for war. And then we have our paragraph. It says, how does the author describe Northern life? So you'll want to start with your topic sentence and then use as many details as you can to support your main idea. I think this information about baseball would be good evidence to support your main idea as well. Go ahead and get started. You have plenty of time.